Good afternoon and welcome to the first of our open mic sessions for Cymera 2020. Without any further ado, we're going to jump right into it with Matthew Keely writing his story Cold Shore.
Cold Shore. Dull lampposts lead the way. They're always on now. I skid on ice and our cases shudder in the back seat beside Philip. In the rear view screen he wishes his plastic rocket in loops. Beside me, Mum rearranges the bags at her feet and clutches the immigration papers tighter. She won't look at me and I look at the shuttle. It glows on the horizon like a lighthouse. When we arrive, the launch port is gargantuan. We offload the cases and I hand Mum the truck keys. Silent hours and check-in rows shiver by until one officer scans her documents while another asks final boarding questions. Philip stares through the clear ceiling and holds his rocket up, matching its shape to the real thing. Clear to proceed. Separate now. Philip clings to me. It's all right, son, I say, forcing smiles. Say goodbye to Granny. But why can't she come? He splutters. I swallow stones. Told you already, darling, she answers. I'm too old. Look around at all the grannies and grandpas. She rubs his face in each wrinkled, shaking hand. We stay here now. You go off. She nods up, and his tears dribble down. The shuttle engines vibrate. Mum touches my back one last time, as a wave of people pull us in, and we leave her on Earth's cold shore.
Thank you, Matthew. And up next we have Caroline Grebbell reading from her novella Cala Briste.
Originating at the northern edges of the river, the Cala Ridge traced a southerly curve along the district line before gradually falling away east of the settlement of Harbour. The ridge was 3 kilometres long, half as wide, and peaked at over 40 metres in height, the total sum of a state's polymeric material, dumped during what came to be known as the Reversal, an optimistic moniker assigned to the social change which had begun a decade earlier. Cala Ridge, as with the thousands of other plastic ridges which had appeared across every continent, remains perpetual in its chemistry, its continued existence a constant reminder of the irreversible scourge which had altered the anatomies of a population. There was protest, petitions, take it apart, break it down, move it on, dispose of it, bury, burn, offset pollution against lower world credits, recycle. Some still believed in that pretense, but it soon became apparent that one cannot hide a thing which cannot be hidden. One cannot destroy a thing that cannot be destroyed. Cala Ridge, its monumental mass perpetually draped in a foul blanket, tendrils swirling around the line of ragged figures who waded through the soupy mass. Tin pickers, heads covered but for salvaged goggles and diving masks, the drapes of their loose-slung bags recognisable at their side. Opportunists, hunched over like all nature's scavengers, the tin pickers rummaged amidst the detritus of a civilization in ruin. Hands pushed deep within threadbare gauntlets, lengths of dampened fabric wound and knotted tightly about their legs. Copper, aluminium, precious metals, semiconductors and rare earths, anything that might raise a little credit. Anything that could be pulled, prized, smashed, or melted from the polymer hectares. It was dangerous work. They clambered and climbed, but not as people once did to contemplate deserts shaped by scented Bedouin winds. They did not climb to be amazed at the constellations, or to scatter the ashes of a loved one, nor simply feel the thrill of descent. These scramblers heaved their way hopelessly through banks of 21st century polymer garbage. They grabbed at rolls of rotted flooring, slipped on scum and inhaled the toxic miasma of melty polyethylene, polyvinyl chloride, and polycarbonates. Their feet sank through slicks of seeping bottles and vast knotted bundles of fishing nets and carrier bags which trapped their limbs in foul tides. They became tangled in myriads of coiled, blood-bloated tubing, garden hoses and gluey towers, and their hands burst through swollen cartons to sink into the sludge of long rancid foodstuffs. Over the years, many harbour tin pickers had failed to return from their shift on the ridge. They dropped through crevices and vanished, their screams echoing the shriek of the search klaxons. Their desperate calls went unheard, and then their soft whimpers were lost to breathing.
Up next, we have Suzanne Owen reading her fancy short story, How I Became a Bard.
Hello, I am Suzanne Owen, and this is How I Became a Bard. We gathered in the Yew Tree Inn to hear a renowned bard named Rufus, who looked impressive with his long white beard over a fine russet linen waistcoat. The innkeeper kept a bardic chair in the back room, which was clean and tidy with only a few benches. I sat on the floor beside the other children. In the dim room, moonlight filtered in through a small window, and candles were set upon the mantelpiece. Bards loved to come to the Yew Tree Inn because of the respect they were shown, and I began to learn their skill by observation. I had carved out my own small harp of willow, but it was rough made and never rang as clear as the ones the bards played. Once Rufus had finished his set, no one moved, remaining for a moment longer in the enchanted world created by the bard. The innkeeper stood and thanked him. When he announced that tankards of beer were being poured in the other room, everyone moved out. The back room was empty save for the harp. Seeing I was alone, I sat on the stool and tipped the harp toward my chest. The top of it was above my head, making it awkward to play. I plucked one of the wires and waited for the ringing to subside. No one seemed to notice, so I plucked two at once, producing a discord. I tried two more, which harmonized better. I plucked them randomly in ones and twos and eventually found a pattern I liked. I did not know how long Rufus had been standing in the doorway, and once I realized, I dropped my hands. The last notes rang out for a long time. Feeling embarrassed, I muffled them before the end. The bard drew in a deep breath. "Dare you touch the harp, boy? Don't you know you should never do that?" He marched toward me as I set the harp upright and stood away. Without saying anything more, the bard put his tankard on the floor and sat down with his harp. He played his calling song for a couple of rounds, before placing his hands gently against the wires to quieten them. I remained standing against the wall near the hearth. Rufus was frowning. "Where's your mother?" "Dead," I replied. "And your father?" "I live with my uncle and aunt at the forge." I was afraid the bard would reject me if I told him I didn't know my father. "Are you apprenticed to your uncle?" I gave him a short nod. "Only since last summer. I made myself a small harp." "You forged the wires?" I tried to suppress my excitement. "Yes, but they're not as fine as the ones on your harp." "You've never been taught to play." It was a statement, and as it was so, I gave no reply. I pushed myself to ask the question, as must be done. I knew I'd regret it if I didn't, but was afraid of the answer. "May I apprentice with you?" "No." At least the answer came quickly. I was disappointed and ashamed I'd misread the bard's intentions. Rufus sighed. "Two reasons. I only ever have one apprentice at a time, and I have one. The other is you do things your own way. Could you recite epic tales or play a bard's great songs?" Leaning forward, I was about to try to prove the bard wrong by playing a well-known tune on his harp, but stopped, remembering. "Let me get mine." I dashed out the back door and hurried home to fetch my handmade harp from the forge. Returning to the back room of the inn, I was surprised to find the bard still sat on the stool, with his harp resting against him, waiting. The tankard was empty, and one of the candles had burned down, but we remained alone in the room. I sat on the floor with my small handmade harp. When Rufus plucked 3 wires in a row, I replicated the movement, though the notes were tuned lower than those of the bards. Rufus ignored that and plucked 2 together, followed by several more and once higher up the scale. My harp had fewer wires, but I approximated the tune by starting from the bass. Rufus raised his eyebrows. "What did you notice on the way back here?" he asked. "A barn owl. I'd heard it earlier." "Any people?" "A few, walking from town. Old, young," he pressed. "A woman, 2 children." "What children?" "A boy, my age, and a girl, in a pale dress, and there were 2 men further behind. One was the father of the children, and the other was Farmer Tokes. He looked happier than I'd seen him lately, with polished brass buttons, and..." "That's enough. Fine. You can apprentice with me." I thought you had one already. Not for much longer. The bard stood up and stretched his arms, touching the beams on the ceiling. You'd better wait until morning before telling your uncle. I didn't sleep that night. In the morning, the kitchen was silent as my uncle considered my request. My aunt made the decision for them. Yes, you may go. My uncle was surprised, but rather than contradict his wife, he nodded in agreement. And on that day, I became an apprentice bard. Thank you.
Moving on from stories, we've got poetry next with Sophie Squire reading Black Hole.
My name is Sophie Squire, and this is a poem I've written called Black Hole. In amongst the glittering stars and scattering dust, a kaleidoscope of imaginings casts a film across your solitary eye. Reflections of old moons gravitating to your captivating pull, but they all get swallowed up. A whole galaxy of beginnings and endings are bending to your every whim, and you smile and let them in, grinning wide and wider and widest, until the soundlessness, your only loyal friend, is all that ever was and ever is. And even that gets swallowed up. No evidence left behind in your effort to be unkind to the victims you beckon close and closer and closest, and you know you're hard to resist. The uneasy smile on my face warping in and out as you drag me in and out, and I know I'll be swallowed up. Just as celestial giants before me left not even a trace, I gaze into your eye. Is it the window to your soul, or a portal to the worlds of old? I'll know soon for certain when you send the moons, eating them whole and spitting them out somewhere new, every time you swallow them up. Attempts to push against your pull are futile, wasted energy amidst a darkness unseen. It's just you and the victim, it's just you and me, and you know I'll be swallowed up. A glimpse of a promise in your spiral-shaped eye, when I'm small and smaller than smallest against your impossible size, your edges curled and warping in my peripheral, mocking me over and over and over until I give in, and I hope that you swallow me up. You're ruthless in your game, pulling me far and further and furthest from home, and then you stop. Second thoughts? No, you're just bored now that I'm mostly absorbed and you're finished with sucking me in. And it's a truth the universe acknowledged, that I always wanted you to win. But now you refuse to swallow me up.
Moving into the realm of ghost stories next, we have Joyce Meggitt reading Porter Jefferson is Here to Tell You.
This is Joyce Meggitt reading Porter Jefferson is Here to Tell You. I am a ghost. Well, what about it? Anyone would think you'd never seen a ghost before. We're hardly rare, you know. That scrap of chiffon curtain wafting past the corner of your eye, the clank of metal bins that woke you up 6 times last night. Come off it. We both know your wheelie bins are plastic and you have those soundproof curtains anyway. What my friend and I would like to know is this. Why do you never go outside anymore? I told him it was clearly sudden onset agoraphobia, though just between ourselves, I've never seen a case come on as quick as yours. When I died in 1995, all the newspapers were running stories about video game addicts. Sad cases squandering their days in tatty tracksuits and getting by on junk food when it occurred to them to eat it all. They reduced the world to one small, compelling rectangle, and they never tore their eyes away from it if they could help it. Sound familiar? I don't miss screens at all. A ghost can't see or hear them, and that's just fine by me. Expect by now that Doctor Who has long been off the air in any case. Never mind, you won't have heard of it. Freddie now, the only screen he ever saw was at the Rivoli. Up on Broadway, 6 blocks beyond Times Square. It opened just the year before he died, in 1917. He came back from the war and, well, with half his face blown off, it seemed easier on everyone if he spent his days in darkness watching someone else's silent melodramas, now mostly lost. I tell him about films like Scorpio Rising and others of a more modern nature when I want to make his eyes pop out. Not literally. The two of us are ghosts, not zombies. We have all our parts intact. They still work. They're just transparent. Thank goodness she's a reader, is what I used to say to Freddie. He agreed. You were always such a great one for bringing home a stack of books. You made the rounds of all the shops and gave your library card a regular workout, too. But now you haven't been outside in weeks. Have you won the lottery? I believe you won a fortune and don't ever have to go to work again. I hope you gave that boss of yours a telling off. Now, why don't you go out and revel in your newfound wealth? Get some nicer furniture, a new dress or 3. Throw a party, and buy yourself a better place than this and go away. Hint, hint. No, I don't mean that. I've become quite used to you, and so has Freddie. What's happened, though, to all those friends you used to have? I outlived every one of mine. At 36, I was the last one standing, in a manner of speaking. Or did you get the sack? That would explain it. Well then, don't lick your wounds forever, and don't shut out your friends. My sister had a lot to say when I got sick. I thought she'd served up all her pieties when I came out 10 years before. Family is still family, is what I told myself. I'd called to tell her what the doctor said, you see. She used to eat my spinach for me when our mother wasn't looking. I turned the F's on her report cards into B's. She put down the phone and never picked it up to me again. 3/4 of my friends, at least, had stories like it. We rallied around each other. We made a pact to live until the cure, you see. And then the bedside vigils started. I hung on somehow, the elder statesman and not yet middle-aged. I buried every one of them before I took to my own bed and died. And there was Freddie. Freddie took elocution lessons for a while before he passed, to compensate for missing half a palate and a large part of his jaw, you understand. The lessons must have worked. I've always understood him perfectly. He's taught me everything he knows, and I've been practicing. So maybe this time you can hear my words and not the clank of metal bins. What I want to say to you is this. Don't overdo the chocolate. Make yourself a decent meal tomorrow. Remember not to isolate your heart. You're not going to be alone forever. Band together with your friends and work like hell for better days ahead. And put clean socks on every morning.
Thank you very much, Joyce. Next we have Lindsay Crawl reading from her work in progress, Zenith 16.
Hi everyone, I'm Lindsay Crawl, an Edinburgh-based SFF writer. I'm reading a short extract from my novel Zenith 16, which is the working title. The story follows Remy, an amnesiac astrobotanist, lost in an alien jungle and trying to get back to her ship. This extract is from a scene a few chapters in. This morning we're trekking in a particularly dense bit of jungle. The trees are so close together that I have to take care with each step not to trip on any of the meandering roots. Standing like alert soldiers, some look almost as though their branches are reaching out to one another, longing to be connected. What will happen when they eventually grow close enough to touch? The trunks here are covered in a type of green fungus, forming patterns like river formations up endless canvases. As a breeze sweeps through branches, it sounds like they're speaking to each other in a secret language that I'll never understand. Every creak a warning, every crackle a whisper, signalling to their comrades that I'm here. There's a noticeable absence of insect sounds, and I haven't heard the song of a bird for some time. No mist or screaming, at least. Still, I up my pace. Harper buzzes beside me, his eyes green and calm. He occasionally flies up and down from the canopy and comes down to tell me to veer left or right so that I stay on track. How much further of this, I ask. You must reach your destination, 146 kilometres south of here. I should have anticipated that reply. I inhale deeply and think. When will the jungle become less dense? I ask instead, and a tree next to me ruffles its branches at the exact moment, as if in response. I shake the thought from my mind. There's no such thing as a sentient tree. As an apparent astrobotanist, I'd know if there were. Wouldn't I? Harper zips back up to the canopy again and comes back, his body tilted to one side. I realise that flying on his side, he looks a bit like a bee, his antenna straightened out like a sting. You must reach your destination. I groan, and he stops mid-sentence, his eyes flashing amber. Elevated heart rate detected, he says. Of course it is. You're the most useless guide. You can't even answer a simple question. I know I have to reach my stupid destination. I could just do with a little help to figure out how. I kick the ground in my frustration, debris scattering around me like confetti. I'm almost expecting Harper to repeat his instruction once more, but he simply narrows his eyes, then buzzes away, disappearing into the distance. So, he's capable of going off in a mood, but not answering a simple question. I don't know why I even bother speaking to him. Whether it's my anger at Harper or my frustration with the whole situation, I have a sudden urge to lash out. I clench my fists, yell into the air, and to stop myself from punching the tree, which would do nothing but give me a bruised fist, I lean forward, my palm outstretched, and grip the nearest trunk. I squeeze it tight, feeling the rough bark under my palm. I take a few long deep breaths until my thoughts steady and I'm confident my heart rate is no longer elevated. Keep to the mission, I tell myself. Get to the rendezvous point, gather samples, go back to the ship, find Margot, and everything will be okay. I can do this. With a useless guide or not, I'll make it before the week is through and survive. I won't disappoint the rest of my crew, or Margot. I move to pull my hand away, but it doesn't shift. My arm spasms. I look closer to see what the problem is. The back of my hand is covered with a green fungus, and it's spreading. My stomach jolts. I pull my hand again, using the other arm with all my strength to tug at it, but it's no use, I'm trapped. The familiar knot grips my chest with vice-like force. It's stretched past my wrist now. I'm not sure I can feel my fingers anymore, but I can feel the cold ebbing up my arms like liquid seeping into my bones. Harper, I shout into the distance he disappeared to. Harper, help! Nothing. The green is halfway up my forearm, multiplying at an unnatural rate. What happens when it reaches my body? What if it damages my bodysuit? Will it devour me so that I become part of the forest? The image of the branches reaching out to one another suddenly seems more terrifying. Past my elbow now. Harper! I yell again until my voice is hoarse. Why did I shout at him earlier? Now I'm all alone and stuck to an apparently carnivorous tree. With my free arm, I loosen my backpack and let the bag slip off so that it's hanging on my trapped arm. I twist my body round and search the pack for anything I might be able to use. I try the scalpel first, dig it into the bark with a blade, try to pry my fingers free, but it only speeds up the process. The trees around me sound like they're screeching, and my ears ring as I feel a familiar darkness coming on, the screaming and the blood and the siren, and something's burning. No, not now. I shake the recurring memory away and turn my attention back to the fungus. Distracted, I cut too close to my thumb, and the sharp edge connects to the skin. I flinch as the bite of a new wound shoots up my arm. Red starts to spill into the fungus, which absorbs it like a sponge would water. I watch as the area of the fungus even becomes glossier, no, healthier than before. It likes my blood. Thank you.
And last but not least today, we have Michael Davitt reading his speculative story, More Wine, something I think we all need at the moment.
More wine. It was too late to do anything constructive. The essentials were unpacked, the bed made, the fridge filled with the provisions he'd thought to bring. He'd start to get the place in order tomorrow. Meanwhile, it was a lovely evening. There was a moon, there was wine, and there was the outback to explore. He downed the almost full glass of bargain basement red, vin rough, he called it, and headed outside. The garden, silvered with magic by the moonlight, looked very tempting, but would be better explored in the morning. He'd noticed as he approached the cottage earlier that behind the stand of oaks were meadows and fields stretching far into the distance. He plunged into the trees and emerged a couple of minutes later into the open air. After a couple of steps he stopped, gaping stupidly in all directions. Suddenly, more than a little drunk from the dizzying cocktail of coarse red wine and unfamiliarly pure cold night air, he looked out and up at the huge sweep of darkly luminous blue, which seemed to wrap him about in a great cloak of childish wonder. The moon, nearly full, was gigantically white. The stars were a million flawless diamonds, ready to dislodge themselves from the gorgeous velvet of the sky and shower down upon him in sparkling cascades of brilliance. He could imagine them bouncing off the ground, pocking the earth with countless perfect impressions, then ricocheting and tinkling as they flew upward again to resume their proper places. He was drunker than he knew. As if to prove it, a second moon appeared. But this was a crescent moon, and on the other side of the sky. It was also much smaller and seemed to be moving. Yes, the miniature crescent moon now visibly wheeled about and then plunged earthward. Briefly it seemed to have crashed and extinguished itself. At the same instant a tiny distant shriek came to him on the night breeze. Then the moon swept back up into the sky, revealing for the first time the magnificent wings of a barn owl. Its hunt successfully at an end. Owl 1, field mouse 0, he thought. That thought barely completed, he was no longer standing stupidly in a meadow behind the hamlet of Hidden. He was walking with his sister and Teddy along a narrow, muddy path leading back from the stables to Kindrochit Lodge in Caladine. It was evening now, and he was 8, on holiday in Perthshire, staying with Mum's much older friends from her time as a major's wife in India, Teddy and Joan, who lived rent-free in the old hunting lodge. Teddy was taking them back for tea after their afternoon of playing in the fort they had created in the stables. The light was nearly gone, the trees were creeping closer and closer to the path, and apart from a faint rustle when the breeze tickled the leaves, and the gentle squelch of their footsteps, the woods had grown a little too quiet for a child of the city. He daren't say so, because his sister would only mock him for it, but he was beginning to find it more than a little creepy. And that's when he saw the thing. A speck of white in the distance at first. The nameless thing approached, quite high up in the trees ahead, but rapidly swooping towards them, growing bigger and getting closer, whiter and whiter, bigger and bigger, utterly silent apart from the eerie sound of the air, audibly parting and vibrating as though in fear to let it pass. It happened in seconds, but felt like an eternity. At last, coming straight at him out of the night, he saw a vast, queerly shaped, snow-white face, with eyes like billiard balls and black as hell. The monstrous face hurtled towards his own. Just as it seemed about to smash into him, he let out a tiny, terrified shriek, and the thing vanished. At the very last second, it had soared up and over his head, back into the trees. A barn owl. It had taken Teddy the whole walk back to reassure him and calm him down, while his sister laughed and sneered. The memory of that uncanny bird was never far from him. It remained, in some way he could never quite explain, one of the defining experiences of his life. It was the first and only time that he had thought he had seen a ghost.
And I'm afraid that is the end of our open mic session for today, but you can catch the second session tomorrow. I want to say thank you very much to all of our lovely readers today, and we look forward to seeing you at our next session. Goodbye.